All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another, I think this is going to be my last Sunday night apologetics video. So I'll certainly miss doing these. These have really helped me out as a person to gather all these thoughts together and get to share them with you. It's been a privilege, and I really appreciate this summer and the church helping me grow and just being there as my church family to help process my theological vocation skill. I don't know, I'm rambling, but you guys know I really appreciate all that this church has done for me this summer. So with that being said, this is the last apologetics video that I'll be doing. So turns out it's not even really apologetics. Like last week, it's sort of more, well, this video is biblical studies, is what you could call it. It's reading Revelation. I was going to do another thing, but it was a last minute thing because I'm on social media. So I'll scroll through and I'll see a post about how coronavirus relates to this and Revelation or this and Revelation. And I feel like maybe, but I don't think that the coronavirus is ever mentioned in Scripture. So we're going to look at how to interpret Revelation tonight. So buckle up. Here we go. So I'm going to give you several ways of interpreting it, and then I'll share my opinion on the best, but I want to primarily teach different ways first. So the first is the preterist. That emphasizes the historical context of the book and tries to understand it in the best way that John's audience would understand it. So it emphasizes a whole lot on context. And that's not a bad thing to do. As you saw on Wednesday, I discussed Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28, and we determined that the fall of Satan, as described in those two passages, aren't talking about Satan at all. And so we did contextual digging there. And so the historical context and figuring out context is not bad. And I think it's very important for interpreting the Bible and especially Revelation. But it misses out on a whole lot of stuff like practical application and stuff like that. So it's there, but it's just not fully formulated. The next is historicist. So many events in the book have already seemed to be fulfilled in the first century. This approach treats the book as a sort of an outline of what's happened or has already happened in the first century. So it's a little weird because now the book has no correlation to our culture. So you see the problem with that, right? The book is no longer relevant to us because everything happened in the first century. So how would we relate to that? We can't. So that view is a little wrong to me, at least. But that's another view that you can take. The futurist view considers most of the book to be related to future events as immediately preceding the end of history. But the same problem remains with this reading as the last one. Instead of it all being in the first century, now it's all in the future. And when is that? I don't know. We don't know. Therefore, we have nothing to worry about because it's in the future. So why should we even read it? If everything is going to be later on, sort of challenging the notion of, well, it's in the future, we don't have to worry about it. We certainly should worry about it and read Revelation and do our best to do that. The next is idealist. So it doesn't interpret Revelation in any terms of particular reference to time, but rather relates it to the ongoing struggle of good and evil. And this view is great because in the modern times, for the modern reader, that's great for us, but it lacks in one area, which is, like the preterist would say, the contextual interpretation. It summarizes the overarching themes and deducts them into something that could miss the point. Because if we're just taking ideas, we're not really getting into the book. Um, so the last interpretation, which I would hold to, is eclectic. It combines all of these views because all of these views have strengths and all of them have weaknesses. So the eclectic view would summarize all of them into one. So it combines the strengths of several different approaches. Revelation seems to address the first century Christians directly, so we should read that in the same way that the first century readers read that by taking its historical context seriously. And again, that's the preterist view. Revelation is also presents timeless truths for the struggle beyond good and evil. The visions of Revelation challenge us to forsake our complacency and stay faithful during times of persecution. And that's just a theme of Revelation, is to stay faithful during times of persecution. So that works. And so we also have first the historical context. We got that. Then we have the overarching struggle between good and evil. That works too. Revelation also clearly has something to say about events still to come. Some events it describes await fulfillment, such as the return of Christ, the great white throne judgment, and the arrival of the holy city. These things are yet to come because, as I can tell, Christ isn't here yet. So obviously there's something going on in the future there. So that's my view, at least. I'd combine all of them and try to figure out, how to interpret the text with all of these ideas, not just one of them. So I wouldn't leave you with that because that's not very practical. So here's some tips on reading Revelation. These apply to the Bible as well, the whole entire scriptures, but especially Revelation. There's a couple that are only Revelation, but you get it. We should resist Revelation made easy approaches. I put this in quotations because I don't believe that exists. It's a hard book to interpret. And the truth is, the whole Bible is hard to interpret, but it's not impossible. Just make sure you're using good resources. Pastor Wayne is very knowledgeable, very capable of providing good resources for you if you just ask him. And if you want to do some research for yourself, Google some stuff, look at some reviews of people who've read the works, see for yourself if you want to use that source as a interpreting tool. Be aware of interpreters who have all the answers to the smallest details and questions, because odds are they don't know everything. And if they claim that they do know everything, they're probably wrong on a lot of stuff. So read with an open mind. Admit your faults. Be willing to admit your faults in interpretation. Be ready to change your mind, because Revelation is a very hard book. And so you come in it with preconceived notions of what you sort of have read about it or heard about it. So all these things are in your head. It's fine, but just be aware that they should change as you become more educated in the book. If all of your previous thoughts are, perfect in your reading, I think you probably should read it again, because you're just missing probably a lot of stuff. Because again, this is a hard book. So try to discover the original message of the readers. Some people today use newspapers as keys to interpreting Revelation. So you go on your phone and you see coronavirus hits this spike, or some hurricane hits this spike, or some awful things that are happening and going on. Mind you, they've been happening for centuries. We've been living in the end times now for 2,000 years. As soon as Christ ascended to heaven, that is the end times. So it's been 2,000 years. Christ still hasn't came yet. So we are living in the end times. That's not a false statement. Uh, but 1,000 years from now will also be the end times. Um, so it's important to, make sure watch the news if you want to. But the newspaper shouldn't be your guide to reading scripture. This approach doesn't fit well with a high view of scripture. The newspaper approach that we must be living in as a generation, I guess, the newspaper approach that we must look at isn't the last Christian generation. We don't know that. So it also implies that in Revelation, God wasn't really speaking to the very first Christians. So isn't that arrogant on our part as contemporary readers? What if Christ doesn't return until AD 4000? So if our interpretation doesn't make sense for the original readers, we've probably missed the meaning of the passage and the whole book. Don't try to discover a strict chronological map of future events. Revelation doesn't progress in a neat and linear fashion. For example, the sixth seal takes us to the end of the age. So fitting that in your maps is not going to work. So take Revelation seriously, but not always literally. Picture language with its symbols, images, and figures. It's capable of conveying literal truth and describing literal events through these symbols, images, and figures. It's just another vehicle of communicating reality. It's another way to read it is that it should be taken seriously, but maybe not literally for some instances. And last but not least, Revelation contains more Old Testament references than any New Testament book. Almost 70% of its verses contain Old Testament references, coming from Psalms, Isaiah, Daniel, Ezekiel. They make the most important references in Revelation. So that's important to be familiar with those books as you read Revelation, because I have an example here in my notes. In Revelation 1, John draws on the following symbols from the book of Daniel to describe his visions of Jesus. So white like wool, it's Daniel 7:9. One like a son of man with the clouds, Daniel 7:13. Belt of fine gold, Daniel 10:5. Eyes like flaming torches, Daniel 10:6. Arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, Daniel 10:6 again. And the last one is also Daniel 10:6, like the sound of a multitude. So understanding these Old Testament references and what they mean in the Old Testament, and then what John is writing about in the New Testament, because John is Jewish. So he's writing about what Jews would know. So as a contemporary reader, it's important for us to figure out what that means so that we can get to what it means here. And again, you don't have to do this on your own. It sounds like a lot, but there's been people who have done this before. So get into those scholars and people who've studied this for most of their lives with caution. Because again, if they have all the answers, they probably don't have all the answers. So that's all I have for tonight. Really enjoyed doing this. And yeah, appreciate you guys watching these, and I'll see you guys later.